Hi, I'm Chris Bilbao of Bilbao Board Games, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to play the Sparrow's Knot. So let's get started. Alright, so here's a little QR code to watch this video. Here's a whole bunch of text. Don't worry about it. It actually has nothing to do with the instructions. We'll get to this in a little bit, but let's just keep going. Alright, here are our cards. Place that there. Here are our instructions. They're actually printed right on the box, which is pretty cool. And we're going to go through this step by step, starting here with the overview. So Sparrow's Knot is a solitaire game, right? We'll be playing this by ourselves, where you draw cards to form a grid. The objective is to clear that grid by making sets of 3 adjacent cards that either share the same value or have values in a sequential order. You can kind of see one of the values right there. Once you make those sets, right, you get to clear them from the grid. You also get to save them and use them later, and they'll come in handy as well. But that's the overview, right? It's to clear that grid through sets. The setup is really easy. You're just shuffling the cards and placing them face down, and you're good to go. We talk about cards a little bit up here, right? It talks about contents and terminology, but let me talk about it right now. Let's grab a few of them. All right, so if you remember, right, we talked about making sets using the cards' values. The values are right here in the bottom left-hand corner. So we have an 8, a 1, and a 5, right? They're pretty obvious. What else is on here? We have some nice art, right? We have the special abilities that correspond to their values. That's going to come in handy later to arrange cards on the grid. And then there's finally a little number. You can kind of see it there. It's unique to each card. In this case, there's like a 22. That's your bird ID. That's just if you want to know what these birds are. You can look it up on those flaps that had all the text, right, that we just saw. You could just look up. So here you're like a 22, right? So if you go over here, okay. It goes left to right is really from top to bottom. So we have a piskin in the summer, a piskin in the fall, and then finches. That's just if you want to look up the birds. It has no bearing on the game itself. Really, the big takeaway is these values along with the abilities. Another thing with the values too, you see how we have like a 5 here? There's 5 5s in the game. There's only 1 1 in the game. There's 8 8s. You can kind of see what's going on here, right? 7 7s. That's going to come in handy as you're playing as well. It's going to kind of give you a heads up as to how many cards are left in the deck. If you're willing to kind of, remember that, right? Okay, so let's get back to the instructions. We talked about the cards. We talked about the setup, right? It's just shuffling them. Here we can go right into how to play. So this first step here, it's going to talk about the grid, basically. If you remember, the object of the game is to kind of clear the grid, and you're going to be making it. There's not one in front of you, right? It's kind of imaginary at this point, but it's a 4x4 grid. So 4 columns going up and down, 4 rows going across, which is going to give you a total of 16 spaces that you can place your cards in. And really, you can place your cards in any one of those 16 spaces as long as there's not already a card there. And it's an important part of the game because once you place a card down, it's going to be very difficult to remove it unless you're using one of your abilities that you unlocked. But for the most part, you kind of want to be careful here, think a little bit ahead because you're trying to make those sets, right? So we're trying to find values that are either matching or, close to each other so that we can make a sequence. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to kind of go quick here. You're going to want to think it out a little bit more. So we have like a 6, a little hard to see, 3, a 4, and a 5. Okay, so we built a set right here because the cards are adjacent to one another, and they're going up in sequence 3, 4, and 5. Let me put these cards down here, and let's go back to the instructions. So we talked about placement of the grid, right? 4x4. We only have kind of 3 rows for now, but we did make a set. And over here, this section talks about sets. So let's look at that. It says if at any point your grid has 3 adjacent cards sharing the same values, like 3 7s, or have values in a sequential order, which in this case we have 3, 4, and 5, you've made a set. When that happens, that entire row or column must be removed from the grid. Okay, so we have 3, 4, 5. We get to remove this whole row from the grid, including the 6. Okay, and sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad, right? Depending on where the placements of the cards are, and maybe if I was trying to have a set going this way. So it's something to keep in mind. But right here, it kind of goes into more detail. The 3 cards in the set are placed in a save pile, face up. So let's put those there. Here's our save pile. And if there's a 4th card in the set, which we know we have, or I should say if it's in that set's row or column, it's removed from the game. So we remove the set there, they get saved. This one gets completely removed from the game, and that's that, right? We have a note right here that says diagonal sets are not allowed, right? Because the cards have to be adjacent to one another, but that just means whether, horizontally or vertically adjacent. We can't make diagonal sets. That's just not allowed. And I have some illustrations here to kind of show you like what's considered a set and what you do with that 4th card. But we basically just walk through that. And that's really, these are 2 big points, right? So we talk about the placement, we talk about how to make sets. As you're making sets and clearing those cards off the grid, which is the objective, you get to draw more cards, try to build more sets, so that you're, again, clearing the grid, but then you're also saving them, because at some point you're going to be able to use those save cards to rearrange cards that you have on the grid, right? Because remember, once we place them, we can't rearrange them unless you're using your save cards. And you don't get access to those save cards just immediately. Okay, something has to happen. You have to unlock it. And there's 2 ways of doing that. So the first way, the most common way, is if you fill up your grid with all 16 spaces, right? There has to be a card on each one, in which case you can't draw any more cards. So once that happens, then you can unlock your save cards and use their abilities. The other way, which is a little bit rare, is actually with the number 1 right here. If you're able to save your number 1 in a set, basically by having like 1, 2, and 3, you immediately get to unlock the save cards that way. So there's 2 ways, right? Either fill the grid or collect a set with the 1 in there. Once that happens, you get access to all your save cards, all the abilities, and you can start rearranging the grid. So like number 5 right here says you may rearrange all of the cards in any one vertical column, right? So if we were to have 4 cards, we could swap them around, hopefully trying to make more sets so that we can clear the grid and draw more cards, and then also use those save card abilities as well. Because yeah, the thing is, once you unlock your save cards abilities, you get it for the rest of the game. However, once you use an ability on a card, it gets discarded from the game. So it's only like a one-time use for each card, then it gets discarded. So that's basically the game, right? We're trying to draw cards to build a grid. We're making sets, we're removing them, either through placement or through our unlock cards abilities. And that's the overall game. And assuming you can draw all the cards out of your draw deck, get them on the grid, and get them moved either into the save pile or the discarded pile, you've won. If at any point you can't draw any more cards, the grid is full, or you can't make enough sets to get rid of all your cards, you lose. And you can control the difficulty of this pretty easily, actually. Before, when we talked about making a set, right, we had our 3, 4, and our 5, I told you get to save all 3 cards in the set. Well, you can make it more difficult by only choosing, a certain number of cards in that set. So in a normal setting, right, you'd actually only get to choose 2 cards, right? You got to choose, all right, which ones do I want? And that other one gets discarded. If you want to make it even more difficult, you only choose 1. If you want to make it super difficult, you choose none. And the only way to clear cards are by just through placement. And that's really it. I will say it's a game. It's fun. It has a lot of variables to it, so you can make it as difficult or as not difficult as you'd like. You have to be careful as you're playing. You might think you're doing really well, and then towards the end of the deck, you realize you didn't play your cards just right, and now you can't clear the grid because you either have an odd number or you didn't plan it out just right. You don't have enough cards to even get rid of all of the ones out there. You can also really get into it as far as, deciding which cards you want to save, trying to remember how many cards are in the deck versus already played out there. Basically, I'm just trying to explain that there's a lot of variability. You can take it as serious as you'd like, or you can just kind of throw cards out, kind of like traditional game of solitaire, and just see where they lay and see how things turn out, because it is a quick tear up, set up and take apart. It's just simply shuffling one little deck there. So that's a game. I had a lot of fun making it. I have a lot of fun playing it. I hope you do too. And thank you for listening.